Sebastian, and I'm a narrative designer here at Big Huge Games, 38 Studios.
A narrative designer is, it's kind of a catch-all. There's a lot of different things we do. It's like a writer for quests and quest content implementer, but we also do things like we set up non-quest content like village dialogue and stuff like that.
I'm Eric Capone. I'm the principal narrative designer on Reckoning. I oversee the creative side of the narrative department, the writing, the lore creation, our part of the world that we're working in.
As much as this game is about awesome combat, it's also about showing the world the realms of Amalur, and like introducing all these concepts like this intellectual property that R.A. and Todd McFarlane and Kurt and they all sort of created together.
Building a world that feels connected and that has a cohesiveness, especially one of this size, is a huge challenge. It's been a huge challenge, and going into it, we knew it was going to be massive. Terrifying, actually.
Working with R.A. Salvatore, it's kind of a nerd fantasy.
There's a lot of talk about how we've been given this 10,000-year history, and that he's developed it, and we're working on it with him. I mean, that's very true.
I haven't worked with a big name like R.A. Salvatore before, like New York Times bestseller. Like everyone knows who this guy is.
He's surprisingly down to earth, easy to deal with. Great guy. Certainly knows what he's doing very, very well.
He's really receptive and he's really open. It doesn't matter what your background is. He just loves stories.
To be able to sit in a room full of narrative designers and writers and designers, and throw out ideas and have him critique it as though we're all there working together, for a common purpose, and kind of seeing his face light up at some ideas and then not really register other ones, or kind of seeing the gears turn and then having him suddenly come up with something that can take what you've done and just make it so much better. That was very satisfying.
It's a really good environment to foster people in. I think he's got a really fostering personality.
It's just this really cool collaborative process where the two of us are working together.
Ken is sort of like...
Unique. Unique is a good word to describe Ken Ralston.
It's difficult to sometimes think of Ken Ralston as human, I would say. You sometimes get a little angel and a little devil on your shoulder telling you to do things. You're like, well, I don't know if I should be doing, I don't know if I should be implementing this quest this way. And Ken is both at the same time, yelling in your ear like, what are you doing? Don't do this. Oh my gosh, you need to try this out just to see what it looks like.
He's had a huge influence on my design kind of evolution. There are great designers, there are great writers, there are a lot of different things you can be. And Ken, in addition to being a great designer and a great writer and a host of other things, he's also a great teacher.
He's at such a high level of thought that seems so, focused. He's just got this mind that works so much to try and figure out what is the bare, when you boil everything in Reckoning down, what's left, what is the player experience?
His direction has been integral to sort of everything from the tone of the narrative to the quest structures we employ, and just having him here as a sounding board for everything is an incredible asset.
The main story of Reckoning is really one about who do you want to be as a person. Your character in the game is given an opportunity that no one has ever had before. They're free of the forces that control everyone, decides who is going to be who and what everybody's going to do. And you're the first person who's ever been able to live outside of that. So where you go and what you do is impacting the entire world around you.
A universe that's been on rails for the last however many millennia is starting to tilt. And this is the point of divergence.
It's as much about figuring out who you're going to be as who you were. Who you were can almost be irrelevant if you have a chance to wipe your slate clean and become someone else entirely.
We wanted to look at other ways to accentuate the narrative, to bring it out, to make it a huge part of the gameplay and of the immersion aspect of the game.
There's a lot of players that really want to buy into what they're doing and they want to interact with this world. And part of that involves sort of getting them into the setting, getting them to buy into characters and finding maybe I want to fight these guys because they burned down this village or something like that.
What we wanted to do was to make sure every area in the game had its own identity and even its own story. Because, in a lot of RPGs, especially large, vast, open-world RPGs, there's a lot of dead space.
You're running around in the world, killing things, got this great combat system, but if you're not doing it for a reason, then it sort of starts to lose it after a while.
You can still create a world that's vast and that it's deep, but have something to do all the time. Most of the places you come to have their own, village with something going on, a warlord or a despot that's taken over an entire region and you have to oust him, a city under siege, all these little stories, which for me are the reason I play games, is for the personal stories, the characters. Creating spaces this way not only informed the world design, the art aspect of it, but also really helped us to tell human stories in a fantasy world. Factions and Reckoning are a lot like small main quests. They're not exclusive, they don't cut the player off from content, but they do provide whole new branches that the player can explore. And the great thing is too, because of our destiny system, the player can unlock new destinies, new identities, new ways of playing, new buffs, skills, all that kind of stuff through the factions that they couldn't normally.
Travelers are a group of gypsy people who sort of make their living as thieves in the Feylands. They're sort of Robin Hood-esque without any of the gentility. The common folk love them because they stick it to the rich, but they don't necessarily give to the poor, and the travelers are happy to enjoy the respect without having to share any of the loot. A Thieves Guild has to play a certain way. There are certain player expectations for like sneaking around and, stealing stuff, and so that was approached from a very gameplay-oriented perspective. Like, well, what would be cool things that the player would get to steal? And one of the examples was like, well, what if you could steal a lockpick that could unlock any lock? And we're like, okay, that's pretty cool, except it's locked in an unopenable box, and then, we're trying to come up with these weird puzzles and scenarios that the player has to deal with. We want to make the player feel like Mission Impossible, only it's more like Mission Improbable when the player's around.
The idea with the House of Ballads, with the Fae, is that because they are a race that lives long lives, and then they die, and they regenerate, and they come back to life, they sort of have this ongoing history that never actually becomes history because it's sort of a living thing. It's as if George Washington crossed the Delaware, died, and then came back and crossed the Delaware again. Everybody has a role or an archetype, and they play out that role to the best of their ability, and that's where they fit into the culture and the society. The House of Ballads are the heroes that go through their quests and adventures, vanquish their creatures, vanquish the villains, go quest and secure great artifacts and weapons, and then they die, and they come back, and they do it all again. These stories, these great Fae songs that they call them the ballads, they are embedded in Fae consciousness. And so, the great heroes, Hallam the White, King Wenson, Queen Belmaid, and their villain, their nemesis, the Maid of Windermere, these are all names that are known to all Fae, and their stories live on forever because they continue to tell them. The player is coming into a faction where all the stories have been told, and they're told a certain way, over and over again. And like in any good RPG, the player is an agent of change. So the player comes in, and things suddenly start to go crazy. And so all these stories that are set in stone suddenly start taking new twists. Their presence there starts to throw the established story into a shambles.
Fae represent nature, and the Summer Fae and the Winter Fae sort of are two opposite ends of the spectrum. So the Winter Fae represent like the entropic part of nature, like rotting and decay and festering and cold and winter and death and all that stuff. So they're very like fatalistic and stuff by their nature. Like they have this essence of corruption and decay. And so I came up with the House of Sorrows, and they're basically like a church of Winter Fae, and all they do is they sort of assume this decaying essence out of their brethren. They're like a faction of scapegoats, and all they do is they reach into you and they take all the bad stuff out, and that lets these Winter Fae sort of build their own court of winter and have their own kings and sort of do all the stuff that might be contrary to their nature. The thing is, the Tuatha have no need for that. The Tuatha have this scary new god, they have this magical prismere that lets them sort of corrupt themselves into something that's not really tied to winter or nature at all. They become unnatural. And so the Tuatha basically want the Winter Fae to join them, so they're trying to get rid of the House of Sorrows. The lines between Winter Fae and Tuatha start to blur, and he has to sort of figure out like who's spying for who, and it's all like a very like roguish, sneaky political game.
Every player who comes to Amalur, I don't know what brought them. I want them to have a good time. I mean, I don't want it to be something where they ever regret having loaded into that space or having walked into that tavern. It's something where I want them to be doing something or stimulated in some interesting way every moment they're in the game world.
In any RPG, you want the player to walk away and feel like they were the main character. You know, that this is a game that's about them.
There are moments of peace and quiet. There are moments of great beauty where the player can, travel the world and see it in any way they choose. But I want them to always feel like there's something they can do, something that's catching their interest just around the corner. I want it to be a really fun experience, and it's something that they won't forget.
Reckoning is about the player, because the player is this moment in the Amalur storyline. Like the whole Amalur universe, the player is the one thing that changes the face of it. And that's what I want the player to, like, I want the player to basically, when he walks away from the game, feel like an astrological event, like he wants to feel like he was planets aligning and making all that stuff come together, because he was.
The world of Amalur is really interesting to me. It goes a lot deeper even than we've been able to explore in this game. I could do this until the end of time. There's so much here to work with, and there's so much more that can be created, and it's such a deep and interesting world with so many secrets that you start pulling one string and it comes apart, and there's just more and more and more and more under there.
The thing I'm proudest of in the design of Reckoning as a whole, there's a lot of things the team has done just an amazing job with, from the moment-to-moment combat to the actual architecture and geography of the world. But I'm a real sucker for the Destiny system.
The Destiny system came from a rejection of a very common convention in RPGs. We pick our class at the beginning of the game.
You kind of start out and you choose from the get-go whether you want to be the warrior or the mage.
You have to make these huge decisions up front before you know what you're doing. Like, oh, I want to invest in strength, or do you?
You're basing that decision on information you don't have. You're not sure how a rogue is going to play. Even if you're a seasoned RPG veteran, you're not sure how this class is going to play through the long play of the game. And so we wanted to sort of revisit that.
Something we'd seen in some Eastern RPGs were the idea of a job system or title system, where you get a title for having done certain things in the game.
I've always been a huge fan of title systems. I like giving my character a title, and it's usually pretty meaningless. Sometimes it comes with a couple stats.
We thought that was cool, but most of the examples that we looked at, they didn't do anything. It was purely just a title.
That was the original inspiration, and then it kind of became more and more and more, to the point that it kind of replaced the class system.
Amalur, up until you are reborn in that pile of bodies, has been a deterministic world. It's been a world governed by fate. And you as a player break this whole thing down. And everywhere you go, everybody you interact with, they're all influenced by this suddenly not being deterministic anymore.
These are strange times. Magic weaves itself in new patterns and change.
You pick abilities from 3 different ability trees: might, finesse, and sorcery. And based on the distribution of your abilities in those trees, we unlock for you new destinies that you can apply to yourself. And those destinies are effectively a class. They come with buffs, they come with special abilities.
You kind of start out your blank slate. As you advance, you make decisions that are going to kind of cast you toward a mage, or cast you toward a rogue, or even a hybrid.
There are 40 different destinies, starting with the Fateless one, and then of the ones you get after the Fateless one, they're divided up into 7 different types. And those basically come down to, if I focus on one of the ability trees, like might, I'm saying, okay, put every single point in that, I want to be a fighter. I want to be the best fighter I can be. Well, early in the game, you unlock a destiny called Brawler that gives you some basic benefits to that style of play. If you keep on dumping points into might and nothing else, then by the end of the game, you've unlocked higher and higher tiers of that sort of pure might play style. Each of those is in and of itself a different destiny, but they're different ranks of the same style or type of destiny. However, if I start throwing points at other trees, like if I mix might and sorcery, I'm going to unlock hybrid destiny. So I'll get like a might sorcery battle mage, for instance. And those have different ranks. And different ranks sometimes just increase statistically, but every couple of ranks, generally speaking, they do something new.
I think one of the best examples of that is Blink, right? If you mix any, if you have any destiny that has mage in it, any sorcery destiny, you get Blink, which is a replacement for your standard roll.
This blink is like the warrior's dodge, but instead of moving across the terrain, your character actually teleports. You can use this teleport to do all sorts of cool things, like teleport through guys.
But as you level that destiny up, you get, there's a poison blink, and there's like an ice blink. It slows enemies down when you teleport through them.
The Warlord, the high-tier destiny you get for focusing on that might line, he gets an ability called Last Stand, so that when you die, you can immediately get back up from the dead, wipe the blood from your face and get back into the fight. And as long as you kill the enemy that took you down within a certain window of time, you get your full life back and can keep on trucking.
In Reckoning, you have the Jack-of-all-trades destiny. And this destiny you get for evenly distributing your points in all the trees. Now, you don't get the top-tier abilities in those trees, but you unlock all of the weapon masteries. And so, if you're the player that really likes to play with all of the different weapons and switch them out all the time, this is the destiny for you. It also dramatically reduces your equip requirements. So if you're the guy that likes to run to the very end of the map as far as you can and get some loot, you can equip that loot, whereas if you didn't have that destiny, you couldn't.
When it comes to favorite destiny, I'm torn. With the might/sorcery destinies, that entire type of destinies, as a whole, those are my favorites, but if I was going to pick just one destiny, it would actually be the top-tier sorcery finesse hybrid called Shadowcaster. It just gets a really sweet set of abilities.
The Shadowcaster destiny actually has a bonus on it that allows you to steal mana when you crit. It combines what the rogue does, which is crit a lot, with what a mage does, which is cast spells and be something of a glass cannon.
So there are a lot of things like that in the Destiny system that kind of change your moment to moment instead of just bumping your stats.
Twists of fate are something of addendum to the Destiny system. They are the modifiers that result from making decisions in the world.
We wanted a way to let the player know that he or she is changing the world in a permanent way through their actions.
There are rewards you get for completing quests or doing different things in the game.
You make a irrevocable decision that's changing the future in some way, something that normal people couldn't have done, that only you can because you're the Fateless one. We give you a card, which is presented a lot like a Destiny card, called the Twist of Fate. And those things tell you, you've changed the history of the world in such and such a way, and because of that, you get a permanent boost to your stats that's appropriate to whatever that decision was.
Oftentimes they come in a couple flavors, and so it's a way that we reward the player differently for the choices that they made.
I choose to help these people or I don't choose to help these people.
I made this faction's future change this way or that way, not both. So both the bonuses and the twists themselves are exclusive in that case.
A seat in the House of Ballads cannot remain empty, lest the great stories end.
We want you to be able to play the game that you want to play.
I'm hoping players come to Reckoning and experience the nostalgia factor, the thing that first hooked them on games.
I think this game is one that could really do that.
I want players to feel like they got to experience a world they've never seen before and that they want more. I want them to leave and go, well, what else is happening in Amalur? Because, we're doing more in that world. We want them to see that.
There's so much depth and there's so much personality and character that there are endless possibilities for products.
I want them to be excited about what happens 5 years later, 20 years later, 2,000 years later. So I'm excited to get them into the world and just kind of experiencing everything that we've built.